Well, it is the month of June, and although the temperatures across the country are really starting to get hotter each and every day, the bass fishing also, to me, starts to get hotter in the month of June as well. Fish really start to group up this time of the year where you can go out and catch a lot of fish in a short period of time. And in this video, I want to talk about the top 5 lures that I use in the month of June, the ones that I will not go to the lake without. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one.
The true secret to catching more bass is learning how to efficiently find bass. That is why Omnia's Premium Pro app has become one of my main tools to go out there and break down a body of water. Say it's a springtime and I want to find the warmest water on the lake, all I gotta do is add the water temperature layer to my mapping and it will show me exactly where that is. Or what I love to do is combine different layers. We all know when it comes to getting on a glide bait bite that you want to find clear water as well as some wind. So simply combining the water clarity layer as well as the wind direction layer will show me every hot spot for a big glide bait on the lake. And now with no additional cost to Premium Pro members, the app has Navionics contours in 1-foot intervals for over 44,000 lakes across the US. The Premium Pro app only costs $49 for the year. And not only do you get everything that I just talked about, but you will also receive 10% back on all of your purchases at Omnia as well as free shipping. So download the Premium Pro app and start your free trial today.
Now, lure number 1 is a topwater bait of some sort. Now, more specifically, I really like to fish a walking style bait a lot in the month of June. So some sort of spook style bait. And I'm going to fish this bait pretty much anywhere and everywhere. I will fish it in really shallow water, you know, in the back of a pocket where you still have fish that are kind of lingering around. You still have a lot of fish that are actually guarding fry even into the month of June. And these fish can be caught on topwaters. I'm also going to use it out on kind of the main lake. As a lot of fish are starting to kind of transition into a little bit deeper water, you will find a lot of fish on, you know, flats and points and humps that are in 7, 8, 9, 10 foot of water. And a lot of these fish are active and a lot of these fish are willing to come up to get a spook in the month of June. Now, when it comes to the actual color of the spook that I'm going to use, I am typically just going to match whatever I think the bass are eating. And even with that being said, there's really only about 3 or 4 colors in a spook that I'm going to use. The first one is going to be some sort of shad or bone colored. If the bass are eating threadfin shad, gizzard shad, this is definitely my number 1 choice. The next one is black. Anytime I am fishing on a darker day, you know, maybe it's a cloudy day, maybe it's a rainy day during the month of June, I really like that black color. I've had a lot of success with it, and I don't think a lot of people always fish black. I will also fish a black just simply in the morning and in the evening when you kind of have those lower light conditions. The next color is some sort of translucent colored spook, meaning you can actually see through this bait. If you've ever been out there and maybe you're fishing kind of that shad color or that bone color like we talked about a minute ago, and you have a lot of fish kind of coming up there and missing that bait, sometimes simply switching over to a bait that they can't see as well, one of those translucent colors, can really help those fish go from hitting a bait to actually hooking up with the bait. So I always have some translucent bait fish colors with me. The only other color I'm going to use is probably some sort of bluegill pattern. And all I really look for is a little orange on the throat of that bait. Throughout June and actually throughout the summer, you're going to have some bluegill that are starting to spawn. And so if I feel like I'm fishing for bass that are eating those bluegill, I kind of like to match the hatch, and I'm going to pick that spook that has a little bit of orange on the throat. Now, although selecting the right color bait is great, I think the most important thing when it comes to a spook, especially during the month of June, is actually getting the right sound, the right noise. There is a number of different spooks out there on the market. You know, one of my favorite is just your standard Strike King Sexy Dog. And this bait has a lot of rattles in it. And there are days out there where the bass absolutely love baits that have a lot of rattles in it. But probably my favorite spook of all time is an Evergreen JT bait. Now, this particular bait comes in 2 different sizes. And the thing about this bait that makes it unique, makes it different, is that it is a silent bait. There's a couple of other silent spook style baits out there on the market, but this one is absolutely awesome. And I'm telling you, there are days where they will not touch that bait that has rattles in it, but they will absolutely clobber they will smash a spook that has no rattles in it, like that JT. Lure number 2 is a deep diving crankbait. To me, the month of June absolutely screams deep diving crankbait. To me, it is the best month to go out there and fish a deep crank. And the thing about it is that this time of the year, you have a lot of fish that are just starting to make their way out to deeper structure. So your deeper points and your deeper humps and your deeper ledges. And it seems like when those fish kind of first get out there and when they first start kind of collecting and kind of forming that big school, those fish are typically more aggressive than they're going to be later on in the summer. And so a lot of times I'm going to pick up a deep diving crankbait. You know, I like the Strike King 6XD, a 5XD. There's a number of different good deep diving crankbaits out there on the market, but I'm going to cast this thing out and I'm absolutely going to rip this thing across the bottom. I am going to fish it pretty much as fast as I can. And to me, this is one of the best ways to catch numbers of big fish. Sure, you can catch some big fish on topwaters, but with a deep diving crankbait, you really have the opportunity to catch some of the biggest fish that are swimming in your body of water. To me, one of the most important aspects of a deep diving crankbait is make sure that you are selecting the right one for the situations that you are fishing. And what I mean by that is really the right running depth. You know, if you're fishing a spot that is 15 foot deep on top and that is where the bass are sitting, you're going to want to have a deep diving crankbait that dives just a little bit deeper than 15 foot. You know, there are some crankbaits on the market that are going to dive 12 to 15, which means you're going to have to make a very, very long cast to get that bait down there to 15 foot. So if that spot is 15 foot on top, try to go with one that's going to dive more like 17 to 20 foot. That way you are making sure that you are hitting the bottom when you are down there and ripping that bait. Now, like I just said, really long casts are very important with your deep diving crankbait. So that's why I always use a pretty long rod with my deep cranks. I actually use a 7-foot 10-inch rod. This is the Arc rocket launcher rod. Having that long rod really helps you to get some long casts, which in turn helps you to get that bait down deeper over the course of a cast, kind of getting it down to its maximum running depth. Now, although I get a ton of bites, absolutely ripping that bait across the bottom, I think that's something that can be really important, and there's just days where they're going to eat it better, is every now and then when I'm ripping that bait, I'm just going to kill it. I'm just going to absolutely kill that bait, let it float back, you know, maybe a foot or two off the bottom, and then start my retrieve again. And I have seen days out there where you're ripping that thing along, and what I believe happens is that bass just get behind it, they're about to hit it, and then you kill it, it rises up in their face, and they absolutely plow that thing. Now, the only bad thing about a deep diving crankbait is that there are definitely times in the month of June, especially when you get into later June and definitely later in the summer, well, those bass are just too used to that vibration and that noise coming through the water. And in turn, this actually brings me to lure number 3, which is a big worm. A lot of times when I'm fishing deeper structure and cover, I'm going to start off with that deep diving crankbait. But when it seems like the fish are kind of getting off that bait, or when I know that fish are still there, but I can't get them to react to the crankbait, that's when I'm going to pick up a big worm, usually a 10.5 to 11-inch worm. I'm going to cast that bait out and I'm just going to drag it along. The other thing about a big worm is that it's a little bit more of a versatile bait than baits like a deep diving crankbait in the month of June. I mean, you can fish a big worm really, really shallow, and you can fish it extremely deep, and you can fish it in a number of different cover types. For example, I fish a deep diving crankbait in brush piles every now and then, but I would honestly rather fish a big worm because a big worm is going to come through that brush pile a little bit better. Same thing with fishing stumps or fishing offshore grass. In those areas, to me, a lot of times that big worm is actually better than that deep crank. Now, to me, when it comes to fishing a big worm, this is kind of one of those keep it simple, stupid type of lures. I'm literally just casting this bait out and dragging it across the bottom. I don't really impart a lot of action to the worm. I'm casting that bait out. I'm dragging it slowly across the bottom. Now, there are some worms on the market, for example, like the X-Zone Blitz worm. This is an 11-inch worm, and it actually has floating plastic on it. So it has a little bit more action than other worms because it does float. And so it's going to move a lot down there and just look really good under the water. And guys, just so you know, I'm going to leave links down below for all of the lures that I am mentioning or talking about in case you want to check them out yourself. The other thing about a big worm that you actually don't hear a lot of guys talk about is during the month of June, and once you get into summer, this actually becomes a really good bait to fish very shallow. I think a lot of us, myself included, when we think of a big worm, we think about fishing it deeper, fishing it on rock piles, stumps, offshore cover, and structure. But during the summer, when you have a lot of hotter water temperatures, sometimes having a bait that is a bigger presence and kind of puts off more action can be really good when you're fishing in shallow areas. Maybe you're flipping and pitching underneath docks, or maybe wooden laydowns, or whatever it may be. Those big worms, because of their big presence, I think it's simply something that a lot of bass in shallow water aren't seeing. You know, a lot of guys are picking up, you know, beaver style baits or crawl style baits or jigs, for example, in that shallow water, but they're not picking up a big, huge worm. And so again, I talk about it all the time on this channel. If you can show a bass in a certain area something that they're just not used to, sometimes that's kind of how you can outsmart not only the fish, but outsmart other anglers that are out there on the water. Because if everybody is just picking up their typical beaver bait that they always fish in shallow water, which, hey, I'm guilty of doing the exact same thing, but then you come behind that guy and you're presenting that big worm to a bass that hasn't really seen anything like that, they're going to be a lot more likely to bite it just because they haven't seen it. So always think, at least try to think differently out there on the water. Now, lure number 4 is specifically a grass jig. During this time of the year, once you kind of get into June and definitely into July, a lot of the lakes that you have that have grass in them, for example, milfoil and hydrilla or coontail, these grasses are really starting to kind of rise up and get closer to the surface. Once that grass kind of starts to really hit its peak, I mean, there are places where I fished, you know, milfoil that is 12 foot tall and 12 foot of water. To me, one of the most fun ways to catch a bass is flipping and pitching that grass. And the first thing that I'm going to pick up is a grass jig. Now, to me, over the years, I have really fallen in love with Seth Fighter's little Outcast tackle jig. This is the Stealth Fighter, and it's literally made to fish in this exact situation that I'm talking about when you're fishing offshore grass. Now, to me, one of the best things about this technique is that although electronics can help you, they're not always necessary. A lot of times you can visibly see the grass with your own eyes. So you can just go down some grass lines and you can flip and pitch that jig. Typically, I'm kind of staying within a foot to 10 foot of the edge of that grass. Now, let's talk specifically about grass itself, because when you get to some lakes, there'll be grass everywhere. So going about kind of deciphering where the bass are going to be is really your biggest hurdle when it comes to this technique. Because once you find the fish, I mean, not only will they bite a grass jig, they'll bite a number of different plastics and a number of different lures. But it's all about finding kind of this needle in the haystack. Now, a few things that I like to look for is simple irregularities in the grass. You know, if you have a long straight section of grass, but all of a sudden it shoots out and makes a little point in the grass, that's going to be a high percentage area. If you have a place in the grass where it actually dives in, kind of makes a little bit of a pocket or a cut in the grass, again, that is a high percentage area. What I also really like to find are what I call walls, or just areas where that grass absolutely just stops. Because on a lot of lakes, you will find where the grass kind of more or less tapers out. You know, it'll taper from 10, 12 foot deep all the way out to 14, 15, 16 foot deep. And although you can catch them in kind of that taper, if you can find those really big walls of grass, those things can hold a ton of bass. It really gives those bass kind of a perfect ambush point where they can hang inside the grass and kind of come out to eat bluegills or bait fish that are coming by. So always be looking with your eyes to try to find those unique irregularities in the grass. Now, one thing that I also like to do, use my Humminbird electronics. Sometimes you will find rocks within the grass. You will find holes within the grass. And sometimes using your electronics to find those areas can pay huge dividends in finding little small clusters and schools in the grass. Now, lure number 5 is the lure that I am going to pick up when basically all else fails. And this is not only a lure that I use this time of the year, but it is a lure that I will use at any time of the year when all else fails, and that is a drop shot. To me, a drop shot is just a great bait all the time. Now, I did a full video all about drop shot fishing. I'm going to leave it linked right here. So if you want to learn more about the drop shot, you can click here and you can watch that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.